Joining us today, once again, is Jessica Overley. She's with Sibcy Cline Mortgage Services. Jessica, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk a little bit about knob and tube, which is something, you don't really hear about a lot. It's interesting because I've had a lot of buyers lately who've been looking at homes, and they're looking at these older homes that have wiring that may not be up to date.
Correct.
And so, the big question is, if you are buying an older home, you have to make sure that you can get insurance on that, and you have to make sure that you can get a mortgage on that. So tell me a little bit about knob and tube and what that means to a buyer who wants to get a mortgage.
So the interesting thing about knob and tube is, and it's funny because it really depends in the neighborhoods that you're looking at, because knob and tube really, I was late 1800s into the early 1900s, about 1930. My house was built in 1924, and I luckily was right on that cusp and don't have knob and tube, so I didn't have problems with financing or with my insurance. However, it does come up, especially if you're looking at houses in Hyde Park, Mount Lookout, in that Oakley area. Those houses, a lot of them still have knob and tube. So what does that mean? Well, it's really just a different kind of wiring, and it's called knob and tube because when you look at it, that's what you're looking at, knobs and tubes. So it's actually very easy to identify. The other interesting thing about knob and tube is you might have a house that has some knob and tube wiring,
right,
but not the full house of it. So you might have a hybrid, a little bit of both. There's always been people who talk about knob and tube and say, oh, well, you can't get financing. Well, that's not actually true for a couple reasons. One, actually, this is one of those things that the mortgage guidelines have actually become a little more open and lax on, which is great. So if you do look at a house that has knob and tube wiring, don't freak out.
Good.
Don't freak out.
Don't freak out.
If you love the house, good news. You're probably going to be able to buy it, and you're probably going to be able to finance it. What will happen is when the appraisal is done, the appraiser needs to note that it's typical for the area. So if you're looking in Hyde Park or Mount Lookout, it's going to be typical for the area. So boom, first one checked off.
Good.
All right. So then what's the second piece of that? Well, now you're going to need a licensed electrician come and take a look at it. Make sure that it's at least 60 amps and that everything needs to be in working order. You can usually tell if it's not because you'll see the fraying on the wiring. If you see that, that's usually a sign that, hey, you know what, we might need something to be fixed on it. So as long as the electrician says you're good, guess what? You're good to go.
Okay.
So that's good news. Now, from an insurance perspective, you're probably going to have to shop around. Not all insurance companies are as open to knob and tube as mortgage companies are, which is kind of interesting, but if you think through it, you're like, oh, I guess that makes sense.
Right.
So you may have to shop around on that, and actually I would advise you to at least talk to 2 or 3 because pricing can change pretty significantly, and it's because each neighborhood has different rebuild laws, and that will really come into play with the pricing on that for the insurance piece. Now let's say that there is an issue and you do need to have some repairs.
Okay.
Obviously, get a couple of quotes. It does have to be repaired and be up to electrical standards prior to closing.
Okay,
so this
so
isn't one of those things.
Electrical, so that means some of that electrical will have to be really upgraded.
Correct.
And it can be costly.
It can be.
Yeah, absolutely.
But remember, a lot of these houses only have it in certain parts and places,
Right.
so it might not be as bad as you think. If it's really just an issue with part of the 3rd floor, because a lot of these older houses still had it on the 3rd floor, that's easy to fix. I mean, that's not a huge gutting the whole house. It's taking care of the 3rd floor, which is much simpler than redoing the whole house.
A lot of things, people get scared with things that are just, you say it's not up to date, it's not up to code, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a serious issue that could, hurt you in the long run.
Correct.
Okay.